Hi, this is Amberine Tubasi, CFO of Airtable, and you are listening to the CFO Thought Leaders podcast.
This is episode 1040.
But sometimes, due to macro uncertainties, AI, all of these things, the business might not speak as clearly for itself. And so my next 12 months, through our planning cycle and through our investor engagement and board, is just to make sure that everybody in our company knows where we're going to be in 5 to 7 years. This is a long company. This is a long range company. This is a business that can endure and sustain forever. And we're changing the lives of today 400,000 accountants. And I think we can triple, quadruple that number in that period of time.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Mark Partin, CFO of Blackline. 27 years ago, while in his late 20s, Mark Partin arrived inside the C-suite, largely unprepared for the flood of challenges that would quickly breach his desk. Or so Partin tells us, as he recalls the first of 5 CFO appointments that punctuate his CFO career. For Partin, who had been named CFO of a publicly traded company despite his young age and lack of CFO experience, his success can be attributed to his unique partnership with the CEO. That relationship produced learnings for every CFO chapter that followed. You'll hear that story and much more on today's episode. We'll begin after this. Hello, we're speaking with Mark Partin, CFO of Blackline. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Jack. It's a pleasure to be here. I can't tell you how I've been looking forward to this. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, likewise, Mark. Just to tip your hand a little bit, Mark's had, I've counted anyway, he can correct me, 5 CFO career chapters. The longest one, of course, being at Blackline, where he joined back in 2015. So coming around, it'll be 10 years next year. That company has gone through several evolutionary chapters as well during his tenure there. But right now, Mark, we need to have you look all the way back to the beginning here. And I will say you stepped into a CFO role back in 1997. So you've had quite a tenure in the C-suite over time. But where would you begin? Share with us some of those experiences that you think first prepared you to step into the C-suite as a CFO?
Yeah, well, this may not surprise some of your listeners, but I was not prepared when I stepped into the office as a CFO. I was, throughout my career, I think, the better to be lucky than good, sort of rings out for me. I was at the right place in the right time early on, and I started my career in Atlanta as an auditor with Arthur Andersen. And this was the early 90s, where auditors were part-time consultants, part-time management consultant, as well as auditors. And so I saw over the course of my 4 years there, a lot of activity, a lot of industries, where you stepped in and you were an immediate business and industry expert, or at least you acted like it. And along the way there, I met some great people who, I think years later helped me get, starts in different roles and jobs. And so building the relationships early was key. But to the point about my first CFO role, and I know this will also resonate for people, that's the hardest thing to do, because companies want CFOs who have been CFOs. And you never can figure out how somebody becomes a CFO if that's always the case in this virtuous cycle. And I happen to be in Atlanta when a company was relocating its headquarters. The company was Contour Medical, ultimately SunChoice Medical. And the CEO was one of the best career CFOs, Wharton MBA, smart, professional guy that they had made a CEO. And so he allowed me that role, and the board did, it was a public company, allowed that as my first CFO role because he was my mentor and he could help. And I think that, was my first start. And yes, I was young for a public company CFO, probably one of the younger ones. And it was a great learning experience to drink from a fire hose.
Yeah, it had to have been. And I only say that because you said it was short. It was a sprint. You had 6 years, it looks like, from your first year at Arthur Andersen to entering that role at Contour. You did have a controllership. You stepped out of Andersen into a controllership. Hey, just one question about Andersen. No, never had a thought about becoming a partner or pursuing a partner track. Not for you. Loved industry, wanted to get there sooner.
That's a good question. I loved my experience there, actually, and it was profound for me as I went through the remainder of my career for a number of reasons. But it's actually the reason I left, because I looked at the life of the partner, and at the time, partners didn't have the leverage that they have now, right? There was, in the early 90s, you could advise, but there was a lot of just lifestyle and contribution and impact that they were having on the organizations. It didn't, to me, seem like it was a destination. And by the way, I was certain by year 4 that I would not be one of the statistical anomalies that makes it to partner, right? You kind of know if you're on track. And for the 1 out of 10 or less that made partner, I was not going to be on that track for long. And in those days, your customers, your clients could hire you straight from the audit firm. And so that's what happened. I got an offer I couldn't refuse from an audit client, and that was my controllership role. And while brief, over the course of my long career, I have used that as street credit with all of the accountants on my team that I was a controller once in my life. So,
still, you stepped into a CFO role from that controllership role, and it's publicly traded. Had you had any exposure with the street at all? And can you give us a sense of that CEO who invited you on the conference call? Who was the point of reference, how to do it? I don't know. How did you learn that?
Yeah, well, he was a driver. He was super smart, became a lifelong friend for me. His CEO career was, in large measure, the CEO CFO partnership is the most important relationship they have. And so his career was highly dependent on my success. And so he spent a lot of extra time on me. And throughout my career, I always felt like I was leveling up, reaching up to the next level. So always over my head, in terms of the role, which two things that I learned in the early experiences that were important. One is I can and do and love to suffer. And, that's an auditing, mentality too, because I've heard your CFOs on here that started their early years where, you're working 100-hour weeks and, putting in over all-nighters. So that was common. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing, I just worked harder than everybody else. And because of that, I was able to just do the minimum amount to learn enough. And I had his protection and help along the way. And, I just used that. We ended up selling the company to another public company. So over the 2-year period that I was that CFO, that was the important sort of, outcome or event.
And you shortly step into another CFO role where, and I'm thinking like, well, this is somebody who was already a skilled storyteller, though. And again, that's why I went to that conference call, or you with the CEO. This is where many finance leaders struggle, and it takes them years to develop this communication with the investors and before the board. You were kind of wired for it. And I'm not saying there was a lot of hard work behind it. I'm sure there was. Am I overstating that?
Well, if you are, I won't admit to it because it was a compliment. So thank you. I actually think that this is the skill set that is lacking from a lot of young, talented financial leaders is the ability to move the numbers, the data analysis, the financial analysis of business, to move that to the next level of behavioral analysis and storytelling. And we're going to come to some moments today where I'm going to shed some light on how that was important in my life, realizing that if I want to influence the organization, if I want to be a leader, I have to do more than just run the numbers. And the storytelling, some people will credit their investor relations role, some will, at the board, others in deal making, others still in raising children. Whatever it is that you learn, that storytelling is a skill, to take everything that you know and put it in a way that can make a difference or an impact. That's the last mile, right? That's the final sort of financial achievement that these young financial people that I work with are working on all the time.
I want to ask you about the next chapter as well. And I don't always do this, go into the details before we talk about Blackline, about other CFO chapters. But what I also found something of an anomaly was it seems like you stepped into a CFO role at headhunter.net, which gets later acquired by CareerBuilder, a brand we all know today. And there was an IPO there as well. But then you decided to go to business school as if you needed an MBA. I don't know what the timing was or the circumstances were. So can you clarify that for us? I mean, it just seemed to me like, hey, you already have two CFO.
It wouldn't be
a stretch to believe you could easily step into another one. Instead, you also get a degree along the way. Help us understand your mindset. Yeah.
That's such a good question, Jack. I'm not surprised, but I'm happy you picked up on that. It was a seminal moment for my wife and I when I made that decision. And you're right. I had already had career success. Had done an IPO, had some money in my pocket. The market was looking good for me. I was on a roll. But I had a friend who had been to business school tell me that it would open my aperture as a financial leader, as a CFO, to the rest of the business. And not only that, I think people get in a career continuum and they're on this path and they look like it needs to go up every year forever. And this was a 2-year, it was a carve out. It was 2 years of my life to go learn something more than I would ever learn in a business. And so, so I applied to a few top schools. I told myself if I got in, I would go. I went to Harvard Business School. And what I learned from that was sort of this magical moment of taking my CFO and auditing and accounting and finance experience to that moment, which was, in order to succeed, I had to be the smartest guy in the room in every moment, and I had to do this work, to a broader sense of the organization, understanding the business, having empathy for the different roles inside the company, being a leader for the company versus just for the finance team. And it was a really important moment because I saw the organization as a whole company versus just from the side of the numbers. And then I built on top of that through the rest of my career. So yes, I had a lot of money in my pocket when I was in school, and it was a journey away from the career continuum, but it brought me back in a way that I felt much more qualified and connected to the overall company.
I mentioned Blackline is where you've been the longest, well, only by a short number of months, because FiberLink, you had a very long CFO tenure at FiberLink, which is a privately held SaaS firm, which later acquired by IBM, I suppose. Was that the end chapter when IBM acquires it, or how did you fit into that story?
Yeah, it was. And you're right. I've had two, companies at 9 or 10 year tenures. Well, the average CFO tenure, I'm guessing, is 4 or 5 years, right? It's vesting and then you go somewhere else. And I think that's how you can chase the dollars. Or sometimes people feel like, well, my contribution or my change agent or my status, and it's hard to explain, but you kind of move off the shelf. But the reason I can tell you in these two cases, the CFO role, and I'm not sure if we're getting into this, but the CFO role for me is the best role in the company. And I happen to love it. It is my destination. But what I found in my purpose or in my mission personally was founder-led company CFO. And that's a place where I felt like I could help these incredibly visionary CEOs extend their life, help them run the business, have a greater impact and contribution, align myself with them, because so many of these CFOs, they tap out early, either because of the public markets or the private investors need a different skill set or a different leader or but if they have a good partner, a real partner that can help run the business and take the stuff off their plate that they're not good at or don't want to do, it frees them up to be who they can be as a leader and drive that culture even further. And so in both cases and in a couple others, I found that's where I get the motivation every day to go in. And then that has been the reason for long tenure.
Because interestingly, how you told us your first CFO chapter began with a CEO mentor. So he understood there was a good chemistry between you, even if you didn't have the point of comparison he did.
Right.
And he understood that you would work and you had something of a good rapport that would work. Similarly, you move on from that. So you knew what good looked like in terms of that CEO-CFO relationship.
Well, it is. And, we often talk about leadership in service leadership, right? And if I can service the organization and the CEO, I can get a lot of long-term, intention, value out of that, right? I can get meaning out of that relationship, and that'll take me much further. And again, I'm not against chasing the dollars and moving around. I think that works for a lot of people. For me, I've just found it that in all of my cases, I've been very fortunate. I haven't had a role that I thought I needed to get out of. Every role has been either sold out of it or some other version of it. So I've been lucky.
We mentioned Fiberlink was sold to IBM. Headhunter was sold to Career Builder. There was an IPO or two along the way. How many IPOs were there along the way before let's say, Blacklines?
Well, two that worked, and then one or two that you kind of got to the end game and then it didn't go through, and that's very common. So Fiberlink's an example of that, right? We dual tracked it and ended up selling it instead of IPO.
We could spend a lot of time here, so we appreciate the extra detail. We will have a few more career-related questions for you.
But right now, we want to find out about this company you've been part of for nearly 10 years now.
Most finance executives would know BlackLine as simply as a cloud software company that helps companies manage their accounting and finances. But tell us about this company in 2024 and what sets it apart from its competitors today. Tell us about it.
Yeah. I'll work my way backward a little bit, but you're right. There's 4,400 companies around the globe. The biggest companies in almost every industry, a lot of small companies as well, mid-market companies use BlackLine and have used it for 10 or 15 years. We have long live customers that get in and commit to the product. But what we're doing, our humble beginnings were in helping accountants close their books with account reconciliations, matching transactions, managing the tasks of sparse flung accounting operations. And so we existed and built our brand promise and our business in helping accountants close their books faster with more transparency and integrity. All of that's getting done in Excel today, right? If you're a CFO, you might not even know that, but you could ask, how many Excel spreadsheets are we using to close our books, and why does it take us 15 days when the best companies are doing it in 2 to 3, and they're not, and they've got high levels of accuracy and integrity. They've got high levels of public auditor, reliance on their data. So there's just a great move from ERPs, taking data out, putting it in an Excel, doing all of your work, closing the books on spreadsheets, and and then closing the books and throwing it to finance. And what Blacklines has done over the years is automated all of that. And so there's so much that we bring to the accounting office. Now, there's this, big sort of shift in accounting in the office of the CFO 4 or 5 years, which is funny to say because very few things change in the life of the CFO and accountants. We have a long history of risk aversion and building things that work and then not unwinding it because it's too tricky to do that. But in the last 4 or 5 years, the CFO and the CIO are now working closer together in order to drive greater investment and modernization of financial systems. And so, what it's either, from COVID, where people are more, spread out, it's more data, more risk and security risk. But that sort of collaboration between the CIO and CFO is to upgrade our systems, move the data less, have faster, quicker, more integrity from financial close to financial reporting, and then into financial planning and analysis, or through this record to report. And so we've extended our product beyond just the accountant to areas of managing cash, invoice to cash, right? And helping the controller's office work with customers and convert the cash cycle a lot quicker. So we have a company we bought, an investment we've made in that area of the office. Similarly, we have acquired a company that does intercompany accounting. And intercompany accounting is the under the bed problem. Every controller, CFO will know this that listens, is that, you clean your room and you shove everything under the bed. And that was the old intercompany accounts, right? Because it was complex. And over the last 4 or 5 years, regulations and different sort of ethical accounting, guidelines have driven greater reliance and compliance on knowing where the profits are being made, knowing where the legal entities are, doing tax planning, and then being able to manage that with a system. But all the systems are different controllers, different currencies, different regions of the world. And so our intercompany problem solve or value proposition is that we can help companies manage their close and eliminate the need to unwind all that intercompany, to do better tax planning, and to kind of know that your 100 subsidiaries and all of your back and forth allocations and trade is being managed the right way. So that's the intercompany market, and we pioneered that market. There was another solution. We acquired that solution. So we really have, other than homegrown systems, the only way for companies to operate with a tax planning and ethical accounting around the world that we think solves that big problem. And then in our record to report, we've extended that recently with some new product innovation into more consolidation. And so consolidation sits at the end of the record and before all the finance team gets to it. And it's been the demarcation point between accounting and finance, which over the years has been separated and doing different things. So what we do is we bring that data from the financial close further down into the consolidation and make the management of that data better for getting the consolidation and getting the reporting. And we'll continue to go in that direction. So if you're with Blackline today, you're one of our 4,000 plus customers. You are saving money. You're helping your accounting team do more strategic, thoughtful, forward-looking work instead of all that manual, mundane tasks. You can rest assured that's the brand promise that all of those companies are getting. And then you're also getting thought leadership from us. We'll probably talk a little about AI. We'll talk about where we're taking our customers. It's to do more of the management of the data inside the system rather than keeping to pull it out and moving it around.
The management of the data. And you began answering my question by mentioning the IT leader. And you would have to be, given the nature of what Blackline does, you would have to be out in front with cleaning up the data, making sure the data is where it needs to be, so we can have these systems report the way we want them to and demonstrate it to our clients. Your relationship with the IT leader, did it begin there? Or is that, and were there certain milestones when you look back in time over the last 9 years that we knew we had to take it to the next level in 2015? How we got there might have taken a little longer, might have taken less. What can you share with us about that data journey?
Yeah. Well, the company for, 10 years going into our IPO, for 10 years had been growing 50% plus. Very track record and ramping up. We were at the time the only company that had thousands of customers to put their private financial data in our private cloud. You had many industries still at the time who did not want to be in a public cloud. And so we built this entire private cloud for that. And so that was mission critical information and data that we had to secure and scale to convince customers around the world. So that was monumental that we had that kind of backdrop. And then suddenly in the 18, 19, 20 timeframe, public cloud came to the forefront. It was very, convincing for companies that they could get security and that they could operate with some efficiency in the cloud. So that became less of a problem. Still in some industries and in some countries, we struggled with that for a few more years, but that's generally, where we sort of manage private to public. So today we're primarily public cloud. We still maintain a small private cloud data center. And in the beginning, the CIO is not involved, and strangely, obviously, the CFO is not buying software. And it was shadow IT, which is very common, having a financial systems group and having your own little, digital finance transformation group, because our systems are so much more critical than everyone else in the organization, right? That's a mentality inside accounting, is that there's risk asymmetry with our systems. We have to have expertise and it has to be prioritized here versus marketing or sales. So don't throw me in that bucket. So we had a lot of dealing with controllers and accountants and those sorts of smaller IT groups. But then over time, our value proposition grew. The product set, grew to a platform now where we're managing data for much longer in the process. We're a meaningful part of an investment for digital transformation because we enable ERP refreshes. If you're upgrading your ERP, we provide very early in the process. We ingest this data and then we help you manage it through. So if you're investing in FP&A, if you don't get the right data from us or from upstream in the accounting department, then your investments downstream don't really monetize. So for years, selling into the accounting office was basically the business case, right? Huge ROI, better than Excel. But then in the last 4 or 5 years, where the CIO and the CFOs realized that this is a large part of a digital transformation. And in the office of the CFO, our view is that 15%, no more, 15% are in any form of digital transformation. And the rest are still sort of managing with the systems and, processes they have, upgrading one at a time, or across the board, but not really any major transformation. So we're still at the forefront of that transformation. And the CIO and the CFO now have to work together because of security, because of the data, because we're connecting to more systems outside of just finance. And I think there's also vendor rationalization, cost optimization. A lot of that stuff's happening right now in our industry, and actually across sort of, public companies in general.
Well, that's kind of timely. What are those? Are there numbers or metrics that you're paying close attention to to observe that trend, or what would you share with us?
Yeah, I have listened to a number of your podcasts over the months, and my answer might be a little bit different, but I used to look at a lot of metrics inside the organization, and now I focus on five and five only, and they're very relevant in our industry and its cycle. So that's why. The first one is ARR growth, which is how's the company growing? How much are you putting in the bucket for the future? The second one is a dollar-based revenue retention rate. For the companies that I am keeping, what is the additional spend from them, right? That's the expansion rate inside existing customers. And I'm explaining these because you might have non-tech customers that don't follow it this way. But in our business, retention rate is a measure of the land and expand model. So it's very common to land inside the controller's office and then to expand through a number of, global rollouts, additional products and services, all of that. So that's the retention rate. The third one for us, actually the third, fourth, and fifth one, have started to come into focus for me in this macro cycle where the rule of 40 is a very important measure. How are you growing versus how are you generating profit? And that balance of revenue growth rate plus your operating margin or free cash flow rate is important, because you invest more, you grow faster, you grow slower, you invest less. It's kind of this balance of responsible or profitable growth. So that's the third one. The fourth one is sales efficacy. People do this through a number of different ways. There's a magic number. The way we do it is, how much does $1 of ARR cost us to acquire in sales and marketing? And this was very common in the early days of being IPO, was to look at unit economics, because so many companies in a tech cycle lose money in their early years, and you've got to look at, will scale drive profitability? We've been profitable. We generate a lot of cash, but the sales efficacy is your investors' measure of, are you going to market efficiently, and are you able to expand your business at the right level of cost? And that's an important one. And then ARR per FTE. This is a trend, I think, over the last 2 years, and I didn't look at this before, but this is how, in technology industry, how a lot of companies are measuring their ability to grow profitably, keep some measure of investment in the future, right? I mean, we're managing horizon 1, 2, and 3 growth, and you need talent on board, but you need the right talent at the right time, balanced against the business. Too many people, you start to get, some of the problems we had in the past as an industry, and too few, you burn people out. So ARR per FT is a really important metric. Those are the big 5. Everything else, like if you're measuring culture for decision velocity and looking at employee surveys, those are 2 things I look at a lot. Our company is going through this sort of massive growth, transformation, and in doing that, I look at those 2 metrics as well. And then, I can tell you that my direct reports and other executives look at probably 100 metrics that we put in our reporting, but those are the big 5.
Over time, the go-to-market organization or the customer success organization, the sales function, your collaboration with them, how has that
matured and evolved over time?
It's a great question, and happens to be particularly relevant to us for 2 reasons. One, I run go-to-market. And that rolls up into the office of the CFO, which is, 100+ people helping globally to make sure it's called revenue operations, right? It's pretty common to support all of the go-to-market. And so that makes the office of the CFO more connected to that, process. So to your questions, yes, they care a lot, not just during planning season and budget reporting, but how can we get the right data, the right systems, and have a more seamless operation, whether it's deal desk or whatever. So the relationship is very good. And the second reason is that many years ago, we put a financial partnering in place. So the financial group actually has somebody over P&T, that group over P&T, and then a group over sales and marketing that further divides into those groups you mentioned. That's super important because you want to know the business, you want to know the players, and they need to know that you are an advocate for them. Not just the guy telling them to spend less, but somebody who understands, is showing up in their every meeting, whether it's pipeline reviews or team reviews, but that person and that partnership model has worked really well for us over the years. It scales, and it brings those groups you mentioned closer to us.
Was that in place when you arrived, or is that something the organization, as it grew beyond 2015, the pieces fell in place?
It was not in place when I arrived. When I arrived, there was nothing in place. That's how long ago I got here. And it wasn't even my idea. It came from two people that I hired in finance that sort of organized themselves to say, this is how it needs to be done. They came from really great experience. I have a wonderful team. And they brought that forward, and we jumped on that. And then after we did it, by the way, the HR team has done something very similar. HR partners. So we've been very fortunate that model works. And the shocking thing is that in this environment where everybody is spread out, from post COVID, you'll often find we're the ones bringing people together. They don't get together as often as they should. They're not having the interlock meetings, and so finance has become sort of this nexus for collaboration, planning, and I think that's really bestowed another responsibility on us, right? In addition to partnership, we need to be leading these groups, and we do that.
We've heard frequently that during the pandemic, often it was the FP&A people who had to show up in the office because they would have to collaborate and they would have to, get some FaceTime with whoever. Was that a dynamic with you folks or not really?
Yeah, and it still is today. The ones most committed to kind of return to office is the finance and accounting team. We're in the office on a guaranteed 2 days a week, some a little more. And we were all hired in the same area, and so we work that way. And the reality is that we work in a we try to do continuous accounting, continuous finance, but we're in a batch world when you come to the end of the month. And so there's a behavior that goes with getting together, closing the books together, and all the stuff that comes from the business comes to us. So we like the togetherness, the apprenticeship that goes with it.
To ask you, I want to touch on AI with you. What do you think are the key areas where AI will have an impact on inside the finance function? Key areas where AI will impact the finance function. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I think accounting and finance maybe operate slightly differently in terms of timing. In the finance section, we are already using finance for forecasting, taking tons of data and using that to be predictive in our modeling. I think that gets a lot more traction in the engagement model. I think in accounting, it's going to be a little longer timeline. I sign rep letters that say, to the audit firms that say I have to rep that and confirm we didn't use AI in the preparation of financial statements or internal controls. And so the compliance and governance and controls that exist around accounting, I think, is a bigger obstacle to move from real fast, rapid, abrupt change. And I think that's a good thing. We've used AI in some form or another for many, many years. We've used it for high volume matching transactions throughout our system as one example. And then coming up, we'll be able to use it, I think, for risk detection, risk mitigation and detection, ways that you can use it as a tool, or not even a co-pilot, but a tool to take outliers and data behaviors and put them into different risk categories. We're doing that in journals today, where journals we can analyze thousands or tens of thousands of journal entries that people make on a daily basis coming from all over the world and see where there are anomalies, things that didn't look right, because that's where the auditors are going to go. So if your goal as a company is for our product to drive transparency, accuracy, mitigate risk, which it is, that's an area that you can be very crisp and quick to help the company, get to sort of the risk detection quicker. So there'll be areas of that we're working on. We've got a really great team. Our founder is a product leader. She actually pioneered the markets that we're in today from many years back, and I think she's in front of the AI. But again, the opportunities are going to be in a safe pair of hands, like a BlackLine, that doesn't create more problems than you're solving.
Wondering how, when it comes to, say, resource allocation, how AI has it triggered greater investment or different types of investments? Likewise, BlackLine, who was pretty sophisticated already when it was thinking about what was going to happen, how its own resource allocation might have been influenced in the last 2 years since some of the generative AI conversation became amplified.
Yeah, look, we've got to be in a position that we're paying attention to how we can lead customers on this journey. They look to us for what we're doing. So whether it's predictive insights, anomaly detection, financial data analysis, whatever we're doing, it needs to be in a way that we can explain to the customer. So for our own investment, AI, we've got a customer conference coming up in November. We had one again last year. And in these cases, we're sharing where we're taking our platform and how AI is going to be a part of that. And so I can't, or maybe I won't tell you exactly because we haven't told our investors what our allocation of AI is. But it happens in two ways. One is I have a CIO who came from an RPA company, and the guy's a genius. And he and I do long-range planning for how are we going to create a digital workforce effectively in our own organization and drive greater margin, but most importantly, drive greater experience for employees and customers. So that's an inside, and we can learn from that, and we can push that out to the development team. In the other way, we have teams that do hackathons, and they hire, around the world in many different locations to resolve what are the problems our customers are having. Can AI be a way to solve those problems and bring that back to the development team? We have a number of initiatives today. We'll talk about some of them in November, but it's a greater and expanding role, part of our investment in R&D.
And it's part of it. At those conferences, they really are. They're asking you, how are you spending AI dollars? Where if you turn back the clock only 2 or 3 years ago, they weren't that focused. But so you really need to have a conference to really detail some of all of what you're up to have that credibility in the AI world. I'm stating the obvious here, but it seems like along with AI has come this burden with finance leaders like yourself explaining some pretty sophisticated applications and technology. So you're going to have to keep your CIO nearby. Will the CIO be participating at the conference?
Of course. Like we just, we had this week, we had the Salesforce and the Workday conference, and you can see how AI is coming to the forefront. Our CIO and I have done CFO videos inside the company where we're, because the salesperson and the customer team now have to navigate beyond procurement and legal and the business user. They've got to go to a level of CIO, technology, data risk. And so preparing them to have those conversations is part of our enablement function, part of how we sit with, Submit is his name, the CIO, and I, spend time educating our employees on how to navigate that journey.
your CIO was hired on your tour of duty, or I think during your tenure, isn't that right? And was there an opportunity to talk to this person and understand whether this was the right person for the job? And I think it's a worthy question only because we brought up the CIO multiple times.
I think it's a great question, and here's a little history. Prior to Samit, we didn't have a CIO. IT was run by, I don't know, at one point it might have reported into my office, but it was run by, a GC, by me, and it just was part of a back-end infrastructure. We hired one of the sharpest guys, and when I spoke to him, he'd come from an RPA company, a public company. When I spoke to him, he was very strategic. What's happening in the CIO office is also happening in the CFO office, right? Where sort of our purview is greater, where it's beyond just where we were 5 years ago. And he said something to me that really resonated because he had a long-term view. It wasn't about just, IT infrastructure. It was very strategic. It was, how do we drive a digital workforce? He was focused on the economics, not just building an empire and having, the matrix organization. So he's a super strategic guy, and he reported into the CEO. So those are things that I think signal to the company that CIO is not just a part of our growth and scale and strategic team, but it's a part of our product, right? Because if we're selling a technology product or service or AI and automation, this is a partner. And I think that was a really great step that happened about a year or two ago. So it was in the interview process. Yes, I fell in love with him early. Happy to have him on board. And we meet every 2 weeks and talk about, the big things that are happening in the company. We see a wider disparity in customer posture and technology. Like there are some who really want to lean in, and then others who want to just learn. So we've got to be in a position that we're paying attention to how we can lead customers on this journey. They look to us for what we're doing. So whether it's predictive insights, anomaly detection, financial data analysis, whatever we're doing, it needs to be in a way that we can explain to the customer. So for our own investment, AI, we've got a customer conference coming up in November. We had one again last year. And in these cases, we're sharing where we're taking our platform and how AI is going to be a part of that. And so I won't tell you exactly because we haven't told our investors what our allocation of AI is. But it happens in two ways. One is I have a CIO who came from an RPA company, and the guy's a genius. And he and I do long-range planning for how are we going to create a digital workforce effectively in our own organization and drive greater margin, but most importantly, drive greater experience for employees and customers. So that's an inside, and we can learn from that, and we can push that out to the development team. In the other way, we have teams that do hackathons and that we hire, around the world in many different locations to resolve what are the problems our customers are having. Can AI be a way to solve those problems and bring that back to the development team? We have a number of initiatives today. We'll talk about some of them in November, but it's a greater and expanding role, part of our investment in R&D.
Well, great. Thank you for that. Going to quickly jump to our finance strategic moment question, where we're looking for just one of your many moments of insight that you've had already today, but over the last 27 years, perhaps. What comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And here's a little history. Prior to Samit, we didn't have a CIO. IT was run by, I don't know, at one point it might have reported into my office, but it was run by, a GC, by me, and it just was part of a back-end infrastructure. We hired one of the sharpest guys, and when I spoke to him, he'd come from an RPA company, a public company. When I spoke to him, he was very strategic. what's happening in the CIO office is also happening in the CFO office, right? Where sort of our purview is greater, where it's beyond just where we were 5 years ago. And he said something to me that really resonated because he had a long-term view. It wasn't about just, IT infrastructure. It was very strategic. It was, how do we drive a digital workforce? He was focused on the economics, not just building an empire and having, the matrix organization. So he's a super strategic guy, and he reported into the CEO. So those are things that I think signal to the company that CIO is not just a part of our growth and scale and strategic team, but it's a part of our product, right? Because if we're selling a technology product or service or AI and automation, this is a partner. And I think that was a really great step that happened about a year or two ago. So it was in the interview process. Yes, I fell in love with him early. Happy to have him on board. And we meet every 2 weeks and talk about, the big things that are happening in the company.
Well, great. Thank you for that. Going to quickly jump to our finance strategic moment question, where we're looking for just one of your many moments of insight that you've had already today, but over the last 27 years, perhaps. What comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
You're right. I have had many, many, many over the years, but the one that stood out to me when I started thinking about this question is the role of the finance team that I think I learned a lot about over the years. And that is, and this, I hope this isn't controversial, but it might be. I had always viewed finance's role, accounting and finance's role, as informing and educating decision makers, right? Well, let's be the group that puts the data in place and the financial analysis so that the leaders, the decision makers, can make quick, informed decisions. Somewhere along the way, though, I feel that role has increased. We are part of the decision process. We just are. Whether it's our storytelling, our analysis, or our we talked earlier about where the finance people sit in the organization. We're oftentimes the ones that bring people together. We're the ones that see the business beyond their silos. We're the ones that know through our place in the organization, so oftentimes more than we give ourselves credit for. So I am always on my team that they're making a decision. They're part of the decision process. They need to bring people along. They need to be transparent about it, but they can't just put down a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint and walk away. They're part of that decision. And I think if that mentality or responsibility or ownership starts to sit with leaders, a finance team, they start to become leaders. They start to take it more seriously. They start to look at it from where they got the data and what story they're telling. So I'm a big believer that migration or transition has to happen, and in our work it has.
We're going to move to our mentoring round, where we'll ask you several quick questions intended to inform and inspire future finance leaders. I want to change my typical question here, which is to ask you about that first 60 days in the role. Again, you explained or outlined for us very nicely that first CFO tour of chapter way back when at Contour Medical, where you had the CEO sort of right at your side as a mentor. But as you advanced into these other CFO roles, you had quite a few learning experiences over a span of 10 years. What is it when as you matured and had the role, been appointed several times, what is it that first guy who took the job just didn't know or understand?
Gosh, well, he didn't know a lot. He didn't know a lot as a CFO. And I think, I mentioned this earlier, that always wanting to have the answers, doing the work, trying to be the smartest person in the room. It wasn't ego. It was just that I felt I added was what was that way. And then over the years, I think I learned, as you sort of mature into the role, I learned more about how to be empathetic, for sure. Oftentimes in my early roles, goal oriented, the finance person is often the one making the tough decisions, right? And you're really focused on the success of and you often forget about the success of the people. And you might put your empathy aside, or and so I, over the years, have learned how to do better about balancing those things.
Nice insight into leadership, Mark. Thank you for that.
What about a book or a resource for us? Anything you'd recommend? Might be something you escape with, even. Anything? Doesn't have to be, but maybe a podcast.
Yeah, I would say, especially if this is advice or mentorship to young finance people, I would just say read anything but business books. Anything but finance and accounting books. Just get out and read anything, because inside the organization, you are a more valuable communicator and partner to your constituents, whether it's a shareholder or a board or a marketing or salesperson, right? You've got to be better rounded. And I think reading will help do that. But if I had to put one book on it, my mentor and professor at business school, a guy named Clay Christensen, he's sort of famous for The Innovator's Dilemma. But another book he wrote was How Will You Measure Your Life? And as an early professional who was willing to do everything and anything for my job and my career and put everything on the line, decade after decade, this was one of those moments where you can reflect on what kind of person am I becoming? And at the end of my career, will I feel like I've achieved the right balance or the right, life? And so it was meaningful to me. It hit me just at the right time in my late 30s and early 40s. And I would recommend that book.
Wow. Great selection for us. Thank you for that.
We're up to our final question. Sorry we went so long. We'd like you to look forward, and we're interested in your priorities as a CFO for the coming 12 months. I guess it begins with that conference coming up, but your priorities for the next 12 months, what would those be?
Well, let me subdivide them. I think my first priority is to do less. I think I need to be more and do less for my team. I focus on my team, and really, I think if there's any sort of value that I can bring to the table, it's just continuing to help my team become the leaders they want to be. I think in maybe more intangible terms over the next 12 months, in this macro environment, sometimes businesses, ours in particular, speak for themselves. Right? It's just an elegant, beautiful business and business model. But sometimes due to macro uncertainties, AI, all of these things, the business might not speak as clearly for itself. And so my next 12 months, through our planning cycle and through our investor engagement and board, is just to make sure that everybody in our company knows where we're going to be in 5 to 7 years. This is a long company. This is a long range company. This is a business that can endure and sustain forever. And we're changing the lives of today 400,000 accountants. And I think we can triple, quadruple that number in that period of time. We've got to really drive our mission, which is just making the lives of accounting teams and finance teams better through better systems. And so telling that story and keeping people on board for the long term is, I think, a CFO's job in any moment, but particularly now where things get noisy.
Mark Partin, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you, Jack. I appreciate it.